And yet another very wonderful morning out there to all of you, my dear friends. We left off in Jeremiah 47 with the Lord's judgment upon the Philistines. But let's go back real quick before we get into Jeremiah 48 and see what the remainder of these next few chapters are pertaining to. The word of the Lord which came to Jeremiah the prophet against the Gentiles. So the entire book of Jeremiah is basically dealing with the judgment upon Judah. But here towards the end, we're seeing, except for the very last chapter, we're seeing the whole rest of the world being told the judgment upon them, all these other nations representing the whole world. And we'll come to find out how this is a small view of what's supposed to happen in these latter days, as all the prophets really point towards the latter days. Even though there's an immediate context, there's also a much further fulfillment of the total fulfillment of the whole prophecy themselves. So in chapter 46, it was the judgment upon Egypt. Jeremiah 47 was the judgment upon the Philistines. Now we're going to be getting into the judgment upon Moab against Moab. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, woe unto Nebo. Now right down here is Moab, first of all. Over here is Jerusalem, and Moab is on the other side of the Dead Sea. But we read right here, woe unto Nebo, for it is spoiled. Kiriathaim is confounded and taken. Misgab is confounded and dismayed. There shall be no more praise of Moab. Pay attention to that. There shall be no more praise of Moab. And Heshbon, they have devised evil against it. Come, and let us cut it off from among being a nation. Also, thou shalt be cut down, O madman, the sword shall pursue thee. First of all, we see mention of Nebo. Nebo, not the mountain, as there was Mount Nebo, but the city. It was taken by Mesha, king of Moab, in around 840 BC, about 300 years before the time of the captivity. According to the records of the Moabite stone, which is this big thing right here, it stands about 3 or 4 feet tall. Well, what is this Moabite stone? Well, it's very important. It's also known as Mesha steel. It was inscribed right around the time of this Mesha, king of Moab, that was already mentioned. Inscribed stone around 830, 840 BC. King Mesha of Moab, modern day Jordan. Discovered by Anglican missionary Frederick Augustus Klein in August 1868. So a little over 100 years ago, this thing was found. At ancient site of Dibon, smashed by local villagers the next year. Now, they took it, and there was this whole debacle. They took it, and they were trying to get it taken to another place. But they took it, smashed it, and then they had to put it back, piece it back together. Now, this Moabite stone, it's very important, really, because it verifies quite a bit of what's written in the Bible. The Moabite stone, also called the Mesha steel, is an inscribed black basalt monument written in the Moabite language in 835, 830, whatever BC. It contains references to biblical figures such as an Israelite king Omri and Moabite king Mesha, both of those mentioned in Scripture, written on, as well as the covenant name of God himself. The Moabite stone, the first mention of the God of Israel in the earliest archaeological finds. Very important. Omri, and it says on it, translated, Omri was the king of Israel, and he oppressed Moab, and I took the vessels of Jehovah. Well, in case you're wondering to yourself, who is this Omri that it's speaking of? Well, Omri was the father of Ahab. Remember Ahab and Jezebel and Elijah, all around that time. And Omri, pretty wicked king. And as you can see right here, just for scope, it's a large stone. And once again, Mesha, at the time of Ahab and Elijah and all them, he had this stone made. Very, very old stone, almost 3,000 years old. And here we see the earliest archaeological evidence of the God of heaven, his name inscribed upon it. Now, there may be others, archaeological evidence that has been found in Jerusalem, let's say, or somewhere throughout Israel. There may be earlier than that, but they just don't probably date it correctly or something like that. But as far as we know, that's the oldest. But anyway, a voice of crying shall be from Horonaim, spoiling and great destruction. Moab is destroyed. Her little ones have caused a cry to be heard. For in the going up of Luhith, continual weeping shall go up. For in the going down of Horonaim, the enemies have heard a great destruction. Now, it is saying something that Moab is being so destroyed because Moab boasted quite a bit, even on that stone, the Moabite stone. The self-glorying, Ellicott notes, the self-glorying boast of Moab, of which the Moabite inscription discovered and so forth, it makes mention of this, seemed to have been almost proverbial. Mentions other times about how Moab boasted about how they couldn't be conquered and all, but right here we're being told about how they're just destroyed. Verse 6, flee, save your life, and be like the heath in the wilderness, like a dried up plant in the wilderness. For because thou hast trusted in thy works and in thy treasures, thou shalt also be taken. And Chemosh, their god, Chemosh, shall go forth into captivity with his priests and his princes together. Isn't that something? They sit around and they worship these idols, and these idols can be taken into captivity easier than their worshipers can, because they can't move, they can't talk, they can't yell out. They can't do anything. Well, foolishness. But what's the sense in being like this dried up plant, tree, shrub, bush, whatever, in the desert? What's the sense in that? The sense is live in the wilderness like the heath or juniper. Do not trust in your walls, which so many of the ancients did trust in their walls. And the spoiler, Nebuchadnezzar, shall come upon every city, and no city shall escape. The valley also shall perish, and the plain shall be destroyed, as the Lord hath spoken. Give wings unto Moab, that it may flee and get away, for the cities thereof shall be desolate, without any to dwell therein. Cursed be he that doeth the work of the Lord deceitfully. Now listen to this. Quite stern right here. Cursed be he that doeth the work of the Lord deceitfully, and cursed be he that keepeth back his sword from blood. Moab hath been at ease from his youth, and he hath settled on his lees, and hath not been emptied from vessel to vessel. Neither hath he gone into captivity, therefore his taste remained in him, and his scent is not changed. Now what's being said right here? First, let's focus on the first part real quick, and we see, cursed be he that keepeth back his sword from blood, and cursed be he that doeth the work of the Lord deceitfully. What's being meant? Some idea may be formed of the dreadful wickedness of this people from the consideration that the prophet, under the immediate inspiration of the Almighty, pronounces a curse on those who do the work of the Lord negligently. Now what's being said right here? In not proceeding to their utter extermination. Don't hold back whenever you see something and you see someone in Moab and you don't want to kill them. Don't hold back. Annihilate. And there's also this interesting second part. Moab hath been at ease from his youth, and he hath settled on his lees. Now this is referring to wine and changing it from vessel to vessel. Now there's something for everyone to learn in this. It's about stagnation and not being stirred up at all, not being tested, not being tried, not being moved, just someone sitting there and just waiting until death, and they're prospering, and they're and it's you must be shaken in some way. He hath settled on his lees. Moab is drawn from the practice of pouring wine from one vessel into another to clarify it and improve its flavor. Wine not so treated retained its first crude bitterness. So the prophet says, it is with nations. It is not good for them to remain too long in a prosperity which does but strengthen their natural arrogance. You see, if a people is left to themselves and they're unattacked, and they're without any kind of trouble, then that starts to grow within them pride. And they start to think, well, I can take care of myself. And then they stop leaning so much on the Lord, and they start leaning more on their own strength. And that's what's happened to Moab. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will send unto him wanderers, that shall cause him to wonder, and shall empty his vessels, and break their bottles. And Moab shall be ashamed of Chemosh, their God. as the house of Israel was ashamed of Bethel, their confidence. Now listen to this, how Israel was ashamed of Bethel, the place where they worshiped false idols. Bethel was the southern seat of Jeroboam's idolatrous worship. If you'll see, it's not far at all from Jerusalem. It's at the southernmost part of the northern kingdom of Israel. Whenever the two kingdoms split, Jeroboam, he took the 10 tribes up to the north, and he set up one idolatrous place at Bethel and another at Dan, which is the furthest north. So they didn't have to travel very far. They had 2 different places of worship, whereas Judah only had Jerusalem, where the temple of God was. Bethel was the southern seat of Jeroboam's idolatrous worship. But Israel, the northern kingdom, found their confidence in the worship there misplaced when Shalmaneser of the Assyrians, whenever he came down and conquered the northern kingdom, like Nebuchadnezzar has done unto the southern of Judah, whenever Shalmaneser carried them away. The mention of Bethel and not Jerusalem in this connection is a noteworthy proof that this chapter contains a pre-exilic element, because the prophet isn't making reference to Jerusalem being taken, but Bethel rather. And it seems like he would have made a more noteworthy mention of Jerusalem, but Jerusalem hadn't been taken yet, so that's proof that this is all foretold in the past. How say ye, we are mighty and strong men for the war. Moab is spoiled and gone up out of her cities, and his chosen young men are gone down to the slaughter, saith the king, whose name is the Lord of hosts. The calamity of Moab is near to come, and his affliction hasteth fast. All ye that are about him bemoan him. All ye that know his name say, how is the strong staff broken, and the beautiful rod? Thou daughter, that dost inhabit Dibon, come down from thy glory, and sit and thirst, for the spoiler of Moab shall come upon thee, and he shall destroy thy strongholds. Now what's being meant right here, because this is pretty typical language for the Old Testament, how is the strong staff broken and the beautiful rod? The metaphorical expression staff of strength and rod or scepter of beauty. So their strength and their beauty is taken. Indicate the union of power and splendor in the Moabite kingdom. O inhabitant of Aurora, stand by the way and spy out the place, watch. Ask him that fleeth and her that escapeth, and say, what is done? Moab is confounded, for it is broken down. Howl and cry, tell ye it in Arnon, that Moab is spoiled, and judgment is come upon the plain country, upon Holland, and upon Jahazah, and upon Mephaeth, and upon Dibon, and upon Nebo, and upon Beth-Deblethaim, and upon Kiriathaim, and upon Beth-Gamol, and upon Beth-Meon, and upon Kerioth, and upon Bozrah, and upon all the cities of the land of Moab, far or near. The horn of Moab is cut off, and his arm is broken, saith the Lord. Make ye him drunken, for he magnifieth himself against the Lord. Moab also shall wallow in his vomit, and he also shall be in derision. For was not Israel a derision unto thee? Was he found among thieves? For since thou spakest of him, thou skippest for joy. See, the Moabites, they rejoiced at the fall of Israel and Jerusalem. But what's being meant right here? The horn of Moab is cut off and his arm is broken. Now, much like the staff that's already been spoken, the horn of Moab is like an animal's horn. The horn of animals was naturally the symbol of their strength, and it was as natural that the symbolism should be extended to men and nations. The figure of the broken arm, though, his arm is broken. The figure of the broken arm, powerless to grasp sword or scepter. So you can't go to war, nor can you rule. But also notice this second part, Moab also shall wallow in his vomit, make him drunken, wallow in his vomit, for he also shall be in derision. As drunken men vomit, and stagger, and fall, and wallow in their vomit, so let the Moabites fall by the sword, wallow in their blood, and like drunken men be mocked at, and had in derision by all those who see what their vaunts come to, and what vengeance they have pulled upon themselves. O ye that dwell in Moab, leave the cities, and dwell in the rock, and be like the dove that maketh her nest in the sides of the hole's mouth. We have heard the pride of Moab. He is exceeding proud, his loftiness and his arrogancy, and his pride and the haughtiness of his heart. I know his wrath, saith the Lord, but it shall not be so. His lies shall not so affect it. Therefore will I howl for Moab, and I will cry out for all Moab. Mine heart shall mourn for the men of Kirhirs. Now that's another name for Kir Hareseth. I know his rage, the verse says, either against Israel or other people, but he shall never execute it or bring it to pass what he thinks to do, like conquer all the surrounding nations. There is no trusting to what he saith. His boastings and his confidence are but lies, and shall never affect his designs. They probably, in Moab, they would probably hold these secret councils whenever Nebuchadnezzar was conquering all the land, and then Nebuchadnezzar was coming down, and he was weakening all these other nations. The Moabites probably thought to themselves, okay, well, we'll take over all of this, and we'll rule over it. O vine of Sibmah, which is to the north now. O vine of Sibmah, I will weep for thee with the weeping of Jazer. Now, this isn't the Lord speaking, because you always have to pay close. I remember Chuck Missler, he made note of that. He says you have to pay attention in Scripture with a fine-tooth comb. You have to really, really be zoned in on what's being said, or else you're going to miss an entire. You could be in, Antarctica. If you're not careful. O vine of Sibmah, I will weep for thee with the weeping of Jazer. Thy plants are gone over the sea. They reach even to the sea of Jazer. The spoiler is fallen upon thy summer fruits and upon thy vintage, and joy and gladness is taken from the plentiful field and from the land of Moab. And I have caused wine to fail from the wine presses. None shall tread with shouting. Their shouting shall be no shouting. Now, just as Ellicott noted, the changes of persons, you have to take note of it once again. The I that speaks is neither, in this instance, is neither Jehovah nor the prophet, but the unnamed mourner, who in the next clause appears in the third person as the representative of those who mourn for Moab, which we find out contextually. Now, even though it did say, I, the Lord, have seen his wrath, now we're getting on to another, this representing the people of the land mourning. As we read right here, just in case you need proof, just keep going and you'll find out the context of this. It's not the Lord saying that he's mourning for them in this case, but from the cry of Heshbon, even unto Elealeh, and even unto Jahaz have they uttered their voice. So they have uttered their voice from Zoar, even unto Horonaim, as a heifer of 3 years old. For the waters also of Nimrim shall be desolate. Moreover, I will cause to cease in Moab, saith the Lord, him that offereth in the high places, and him that burneth incense to his gods. So we're seeing how, and the prophet Jeremiah does this, the prophets in general do this, about how they'll go from speaking for the people, then for themselves, and then for the Lord. So once again, pay very close attention. But right here, we're seeing how the people are mourning for Moab, all these cities being destroyed. And we also read, as a heifer of 3 years old will they mourn. The meaning undoubtedly is that the cry of Moab, beginning at Heshbon, was continued on from city to city till the whole country resounded, as with the lowing of a cow that runs from place to place in search of her calf that has been taken from her. Now, I've grown up on a farm. I know quite a bit about cows. I've had to go and pull them out with my dad and everything, and my grandpa and my uncles, all them farmers. I worked on a farm since I was, I believe I was just a young boy. I was probably about 6 or 7 or 8 whenever I first started actually working in the tobacco fields. And then I got a little older. I started working in hay, and I did it for many, many years, up until the time I was about probably 20, early 20s. But, yeah, just like a mama cow going on out, and she's looking for her young. I've heard them just whine and whine and whine, and sure enough, the little one, it'll show up later. But right here, we're being told how the little calf would never show up, and how the mama would just keep crying out and keep crying out. And man, I have heard those cows, they bawl for hours and hours and hours. I mean, until their little one showed up. Therefore, mine heart shall sound for Moab like pipes. Now, who's speaking right here, if any of you all can guess? Well, this is the prophet speaking. So we went from the Lord to the people. Now the prophet, once again, you have to really keep up with what's being said. Therefore, mine heart shall sound for Moab like pipes, and mine heart shall sound like pipes for the men of Kirheres. Because the riches that he hath gotten are perished, for every head shall be bald, and every beard clipped. like mourning. That's how they mourned. Upon all the hands shall be cuttings, and upon the loins sackcloth. The prophet's heart becomes, as it were, musical in its groans and sighs. He cannot look on the panic-stricken and mourning city without sharing in its misery. The pipe is chosen rather than the harp, because it had come to be recognized the music for funerals. There shall be lamentation generally upon all the housetops of Moab, and in the streets thereof. For I have broken Moab like a vessel wherein is no pleasure, like a pot that the potter's made, and it's not formed right, so he just takes it and breaks it. He has no pleasure in it, saith the Lord. They shall howl, saying, How is it broken down? How hath Moab turned the back with shame? So shall Moab be a derision and a dismaying to all them about him. For thus saith the Lord, Behold, he, Nebuchadnezzar, shall fly as an eagle, and shall spread his wings over Moab. Kerioth is taken, and the strongholds are surprised, and the mighty men's hearts in Moab at that day shall be as the heart of a woman in her pangs, and Moab shall be destroyed from being a people, because he hath magnified himself against the Lord. Now, it would do us well to remember whenever Jeremiah had the stalk on his shoulders, and he's sending a message out to the Moabites and to the surrounding nations and telling all of them that they'll go into captivity, how the same message that was preached unto the Jews was also preached to the rest of them. So God is letting the people of all the world, the known world, he's letting all the main nations know, you are all, including my own people, I'm hitting the reset button on you. I'm taking you all away. This idolatry is just, it's everywhere now. And it's just like the flood in a way, instead of just killing all of them, because there was another reason behind the flood. Well, we believe that maybe the genetics of man had just been corrupted by the fallen angels and such. Anyway, we see how God is hitting the reset button. And after they go into captivity, these nations, after Nebuchadnezzar takes them into captivity, idolatry is not as prevalent, especially among the Jews. The Jews, they come back and you don't hear any more about idolatry. Notice how you never do hear about Jesus getting on to the Pharisees or any of the people and saying, okay, you all worship Baal and you worship Moloch and you worship all. No, Jesus doesn't say that. What does he say? He says, you're proud, you're lifted up, you're self-righteous. You see, whenever they came back from captivity, they would keep the law of Moses. Then they kept from their idolatries. So this is just God hitting the reset button on all of them. Fear and the pit and the snare shall be upon thee, all three. Fear and the pit and the snare shall be upon thee, like a trap. O inhabitant of Moab, saith the Lord, he that fleeth from the fear shall fall into the pit, and he that getteth up out of the pit shall be taken in the snare. There's no escape. For I will bring upon it, even upon Moab, the year of their visitation, saith the Lord. They that fled stood under the shadow of Heshbon, all the way on the period of the north. They that fled all the way to Heshbon because of the force, but a fire shall come forth out of Heshbon, and a flame from the midst of Sion, and shall devour the corner of Moab, and the crown of the head of the tumultuous ones, meaning their great warriors and their mighty royalty and kings and all. So all of these, he's just saying there's no escape. And this message of Jeremiah, it would have reached the surrounding nations, just as it did because he sent messengers out with this message to go into their kings and such whenever he had the stalks on his shoulders. But even in Babylon, he was sending letters and telling them about their future. So these prophecies from this one man, Jeremiah, was going throughout the known world at that time. So the people would have known about these prophecies. And it's really trying to implement the fear of the Lord within them, and they're just not listening. Woe be unto thee, O Moab, the people of Chemosh perisheth. For thy sons are taken captives, and thy daughters captives. Yet will I bring again the captivity of Moab in the latter days. Now see this. I'll bring you all back, and you'll be free, but it's in the latter days. Every time that it says the latter days, every time, really without exception in the scripture, you can be sure that's speaking of the second coming of Christ in our day. So in the latter day, they'll all be free, saith the Lord. Thus far is the judgment of Moab. Now the Moabites were afterward restored to their country, as appears from Josephus. But these and similar promises of mercy after judgment are chiefly to be understood of the conversion of the Gentiles under the gospel, after Christ mainly, but point more to our day, called the latter days and the prophets. The conversion of idolaters is expressed by returning from their captivity. And I do agree with Loath in this about how the conversion, meaning that they'll turn from their idols and they're looking to the world and the flesh and the devil and rock and roll and sex and all this, about how the Gentiles would turn back and then look unto the Lord in the latter days. Restoration promised to Moab compared to Egypt in chapter 46, Ammon, the Ammonites in chapter 49, Elam in chapter 49. Now we're being told about this restoration of all these Gentile nations. Gospel blessings, temporal and spiritual, to the Gentiles in the last days are intended. It's just representing all the world. And it's the Lord saying this to the Gentiles. And notice that. That's very important, because even in the mouth and the books and the writings of the Jewish people and Israel as a whole in the Old Testament, we see so many promises of the Gentiles, how there'd be a great light among the Gentiles and how God would save the Gentiles as well. And it's really remarkable to look into. Anyway, thank you all for joining me, my dear friends. Lord willing, we're going to be getting into Jeremiah 49 here very, very soon. I thank you all for joining me. God of peace be with you. Amen.